guess to kill.
Facing life behind bars is a reality that most can't fathom until it happens to them. From screaming and cursing to physical outbursts, these individuals are faced with a fate that cracks even the toughest of people. Let's dive into the cases of teens' reactions to their lives being confined to a prison cell forever. Logan MacPhail, then aged 16, stalked Holly Newton for an hour through Hexham, Northumberland, in the UK, before stabbing her 36 times in an alleyway. CCTV showed him wearing a snood and a baseball cap and ducking out of sight as he followed Newton and her friends around the town center. He also stabbed a teenage boy who intervened to try to stop the attack, which caused the weapon to break and the blade to snap. MacPhail was convicted of murder following a trial at Newcastle Crown Court in August 2024 and sentenced at the same court. A month before, the judge lifted a reporting restriction which had prevented the media from identifying him due to his age. Mr. Justice Hilliard's sentencing said MacPhail, who has autism and learning difficulties, did not accept that their 18-month relationship was over.
So, that you made the decision to stab a 15-year-old girl to death with a knife which you were carrying unlawfully in a public place. I'm satisfied that earlier in January 2023, Holly indicated that the relationship was at an end, and you realized that this time she meant it for good. You were not able to accept that. You were obsessed with Holly, and by your desire to resume the relationship.
The night before MacPhail murdered Newton, he traveled 40 miles from his home in Gateshead to hers in Haltwhistle, Northumberland, where he hung around for hours. MacPhail was eventually taken home by police who had been alerted by his mother that he was missing. Newton's mother, Michaela Trussler, was concerned enough to contact the police and arranged to speak to an officer about MacPhail's behavior the next afternoon. That same afternoon, MacPhail stabbed Newton to death. MacPhail, who met Newton when they both attended Army Cadets, a military organization attached to the British Army. MacPhail claimed he never planned to attack her, but wanted to use the knife to kill himself. The jury rejected his story. In a victim statement, Trussler described not being able to be with her fatally injured daughter in hospital because her body was a crime scene. The mother of four said Newton and MacPhail had a typical teenage relationship at first, but her daughter came to realize he was controlling her. Trussler believed her daughter was the victim of domestic abuse, although she was under 16 at the time, and was caused emotional turmoil by her ex-partner. The night before the murder, MacPhail tried repeatedly to be allowed into Holly's home and hung around for hours, trying to convince one of her siblings to open the door. And this led to the victim's mother questioning what would have happened to the rest of her children if he had entered.
Like her to go out. He didn't want her to go out with her friends. He needed to know where she was all the time, even if she was just at home. He wanted to know what she was doing. He changed her passwords on all of her social media. There was just a lot of controlling behaviours going on. He definitely felt that if he couldn't have her, then nobody could. What we didn't know is he meant it.
Holly was on. The Crown instructed psychiatrists to determine whether MacPhail was fit to stand trial after that had been raised as an issue by the defense. After the examinations, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 17 years.
5 years detention under Section 250 of the Sentencing Act 2020 to run concurrently with your minimum term, so at the same time. I pass no separate penalty for possessing the knife. Logan MacPhail, for the murder of Holly Newton on the 27th of January 2023. The sentence is that you are to be detained at His Majesty's pleasure. That could not be for a period less than 17 years in total. Because you have already spent 641 days in custody, I have to deduct those days. And so the minimum term I now specify.
17-year-old Fode Kamara was only 15 when he fatally shot McKeever inside her Brooklyn Park apartment on November Number 8, 2022. Eric Haynes, McKeever's ex-boyfriend and the father of her young child, was sentenced to life in prison last month for orchestrating the murder. According to the criminal complaint, Kamara told investigators Haynes gave him a gun and ordered him and his brother John Kamara, who was 17 at the time, to scare McKeever's new boyfriend. Fode Kamara said after he entered McKeever's apartment, she approached him with a knife. He then shot her 9 times and accidentally shot his brother in the foot. McKeever's boyfriend fled the apartment through a window and called 911. Fode Kamara pleaded guilty last month as part of a plea deal that saw him testify against 2 other adults involved in exchange for the dismissal of a second charge against him. He chose not to speak during Wednesday's sentencing hearing but did apologize through his attorney. The judge highlighted Fode Kamara's youth and the coercion used by Haynes for the downward sentencing of 130 months instead of 300 months. John Kamara was recently sentenced to 2 years in a juvenile correction facility. Members of McKeever's family spoke after the hearing. Aunt Virginia Taylor said while they're glad he was tried as an adult, they're still frustrated at the idea that he was too young to know better.
This is Fox 9 News at 6.
No matter what age and however they're trying to say that he was manipulated, there's no way that you should be able to walk out of jail in 4, 5 years, 6 years after you took somebody's life.
Fode Kamara was originally offered a plea deal by Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty, who wanted him and his brother to undergo rehabilitation instead of serving time in prison. McKeever's family was outraged and successfully lobbied Governor Tim Walz to intervene and reroute the case to Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison without Moriarty's approval, a move that hadn't occurred in the state for nearly 3 decades.
Excuses on why they did what they did. There is no excuse for stalking. There's laws against that. There's no excuse for breaking and entering. There's laws against that. There's no excuse for assault. You can't walk around and hit somebody. There's law.
Moriarty called Walz's decision undemocratic, and the Minnesota chapter of the National Lawyers Guild expressed its outrage, saying his actions were based on political expediency. Shelby Isaac, 18, shot and killed Eddie Tate II, his girlfriend, and their unborn child on January 22, 2016 in the block of Westchester Circle at Sycamore Lake Apartments parking lot. Once authorities arrived on the scene, they discovered Tate stretched out on the pavement with multiple gunshot wounds. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Tate's girlfriend, Edwina Thomas, was rushed to the hospital in serious condition and later died. She was 6 to 8 weeks pregnant. According to WMC Action News 5 staff, Tate and his cousin had an active hair business named Virgin Hair for US. They carried extensions and wigs between $50 and $250. Defense attorneys believed and theorized that Isaac previously purchased 2 bundles of hair extensions the day of Eddie and Edwina's death. Isaac later contacted him again to buy additional hair weaves. DNA forensic results show Isaac's fingerprints on a receipt inside Tate's car. The receipt was time-stamped at the time.
Are y'all ready for the jury? Yes. Are y'all going to blank that out for?
Judge, since it was pre-marked, we did not think we needed to.
All right, let's bring the jury in.
On February 5th, Judge James Lammy issued a warrant for Shelby Isaac for 3 counts of first-degree murder. Victoria C. was the first suspect arrested in connection to the triple murders. C. faces separate charges from Isaac for being an accessory to murder after the fact. Once Shelby was taken into custody, the documented arrest affidavit C informed police that she watched Isaac shoot Tate and his pregnant girlfriend, then drove away from the complex. During court time hearing, the 3 murder charges against Isaac were dismissed due to lack of evidence with no probable cause. That same day, a grand jury indicted Isaac on 3 counts of first-degree murder. During opening statements, prosecutors described Mr. Tate dying on the cold concrete in his own puddle of blood, and Thomas dying at the hospital fighting for both her life and the life of her child.
Yes, Sean. Thank you.
Fighting for her life, fighting for the life of her unborn child. It's a fight that even Thomas ultimately lost. Her boyfriend, Eddie Tate, laying on cold asphalt, laying in a warm pool of his own blood, fighting for his life. A fight that he too ultimately lost. Why? Money. Money from here. How do we get there?
She was only 6 to 8 weeks pregnant. During the trial, prosecutors argued Isaac had met with Tate before the killing and brought $250 worth of weaves and set up another meeting under the impression that she intended to buy more. Once Judge James Lammy read the first guilty count of second-degree murder, Isaac collapsed. She had to be carried out of the courtroom.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder as included in count 1. Signed by the foreperson of the jury. Mr. Aldridge, is that your verdict? Ms. Foster, is that your verdict?
Yes.
Witnesses could hear her screams outside the courtroom. On November 19, 2016, Isaac was charged and found guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder, 1 count of reckless homicide, and 1 count of criminally negligent homicide. Shelby Isaac was sentenced to 30 years in Tennessee prison for woman. Release date is September 2nd, 2045 with possible for parole, June 20th, 2041. Nicholas Jacob Cruz, born September 24th, 1998, is an American mass murderer who perpetrated the Parkland High School shooting, where he shot and killed 17 people while wounding 17 others on February 14th, 2018. Cruz had been known for behavioral problems since preschool, and as a teenager on social media, he shared his obsessions with mass shootings and expressed racist, anti-Semitic, homophobic, and xenophobic views. He was a member of the Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps. He legally purchased various firearms prior to the shooting.
Holy. Oh my God!
On February 14, 2018, Cruz opened fire on students and staff at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, murdering 17 people and injuring 17 others. Cruz, a former student at the school, fled the scene on foot by blending in with other students and was arrested without incident approximately 1 hour and 20 minutes later in nearby Coral Springs.
What's going on? What's going on today, bro?
The demons, man.
Demons?
Voices.
Yeah, no problem.
Voices.
Voices and demons?
Where's the voices? What the f***? Where the f*** am I? Holy shit. What happened?
Shut up.
Just be quiet, man.
Shut up.
Cruz told a psychologist that he committed the shooting on Valentine's Day because he believed that no one loved him. At his initial arraignment the day after the shootings, Cruz was charged with 17 counts of premeditated murder and held without bond. According to an affidavit by the sheriff's office, Cruz confessed to the shooting. It was also claimed Cruz told officers that he brought additional loaded magazines hidden in a backpack. Cruz was placed on suicide watch in an isolation cell, solitary confinement, after the arraignment. Lead defense counsel Gordon Weeks asked Broward Circuit Judge Elizabeth Scherer to recuse herself, claiming that her previous comments and rulings showed favoritism toward the prosecution, which would prevent Cruz from receiving a fair trial. She disagreed and declined the request on February 26th. On November 2, 2022, Cruz was sentenced to 34 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, one each for the total number of victims murdered and wounded by Cruz.
Today, Cruz appeared emotionless as the judge read the sentencing verdicts, but as she continued naming each of the victims, he seemed to get fidgety. The families comforted each other. Several were in utter disbelief, shaking their heads in disgust. As families left the courtroom, hugs and tears.
I pray that that animal suffers every day of his life in jail.
The idea of prison justice isn't lost on these families.
In prison, I hope and pray he receives the kind of mercy from prisoners that he showed to my daughter and the 16 others. He is going to go to prison.
Cruz apologized to the victim's family and other relatives, promising to do better and fight against drugs every day before bursting into tears.
Yes.
Okay.
May I take off my mask?
Sure.
I am very sorry for what I did, and I have to live with it every day. And that if I were to get a second chance, I will do everything in my power to try to help others. And I am doing this for you, and I do not care if you do not believe me. And I love you, and I know you don't believe me. But I have to live with this every day, and it brings me nightmares, and I can't live with myself sometimes, but I try to push through because I know that's what you guys would want me to do. I hate drugs, and I believe this country would do better if everyone would stop smoking marijuana and doing all these drugs and causing racism and violence out in the streets. I'm sorry, and I can't even watch TV anymore. And I'm trying my best to maintain my composure, and I just want you to know I'm really sorry. And I hope you give me a chance to try to help others. If I believe it's your decision to decide where I go and whether I live or die.
A Massachusetts teenager convicted of fatally stabbing and then decapitating a high school classmate has been sentenced to life in prison. Matthew Borges was 15 years old when he lured his classmate Lee Manuel Viloria Paulino to a secluded area and then stabbed him to death in November 2016. The two boys were both students at Lawrence High School in Massachusetts.
At approximately 5:40 p.m.
Prosecutors say this surveillance video shows Matthew Borges luring 16-year-old Lee Manuel Viloria Paulino away from his Lawrence home back in 2016.
According to prosecutors, Borges was jealous of Viloria Paulino because he had recently started dating Borges's ex-girlfriend. Borges allegedly lured Viloria Paulino to a secluded area near the school, where he stabbed him multiple times. Viloria Paulino was found dead the next day, with his body dismembered.
DeJesus also said Borges would sometimes get jealous.
He yelled at me about me being friendly with Lee.
Also on the stand, Stephanie Soriano. The prosecution read messages they say were between Soriano and Borges.
I think of killing someone and I smirk. I like the sound of it. The idea of causing pain on someone who's getting in my way or who's causing me pain.
In an audio message, the court heard him talk about dead eyes, what it means, and how he will have them soon.
Don't shine, full of darkness.
Soriano's testimony isn't over. The two talked up until Lee went.
Borges was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He was convicted in 2018 and sentenced to life in prison. During his sentencing hearing, Matthew Borges remained mostly silent. He did not express remorse or apologize for his actions. Instead, he appeared stoic and emotionless. When the judge sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years, Borges showed no visible reaction. 18-year-old Matthew Borges of Lawrence will be eligible for parole in 30 years under the maximum allowable sentence handed down Tuesday by Superior Court Judge Helene Kanzajian. The Matthew Borges case was a shocking crime that involved a young teenager brutally murdering his classmate, Lee Manuel Viloria Paulino, in Lawrence, Massachusetts in 2016. The crime involved a level of violence that shocked the community. Borges was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. The case highlighted the potential for extreme violence among young people and the tragic consequences of such acts. On November 14, 2019, Tia Skinner, a former honor student, was sentenced to life in prison without parole for her role in the brutal attack on her parents in 2010. At the time of the crime, she was just 17 years old. The attack occurred in their home in Yale, Michigan. Paul Skinner, Tia's father, was stabbed to death, while her mother, Mara Skinner, survived multiple stab wounds.
And I lifted my head and looked toward where his voice was because it was dark in our room. And at that moment, I realized that I was being attacked and he was being attacked at the same time.
Skinner's daughter, Tia, is on trial, accused of masterminding a plot to kill her parents because they disapproved of her boyfriend, Jonathan Kurtz. Kurtz and James Preston have already been found guilty of carrying out the attack shortly after midnight on November 12th. Tia Skinner was in the basement of the home with her oldest brother at the time.
We were screaming for our son, Jack.
The evidence presented in court showed that Tia Skinner had meticulously planned the attack. She had orchestrated the event by leaving a window open, providing a map of the neighborhood, and communicating with the assailants through text messages. She even chose the murder weapons, a set of knives. During the sentencing hearing, Tia Skinner expressed remorse for her actions, acknowledging her role in the tragedy. She admitted to being a coward and stated that she could have prevented the attack. However, the judge, Daniel Kelly, remained unmoved. He emphasized the gravity of the crime and the meticulous planning involved. He also noted that Tia Skinner did not come from a disadvantaged background, suggesting that she fully understood the consequences of her actions. The judge's decision to impose a life sentence without parole reflects the severity of the crime and the impact it had on the victim's family. It also highlights the legal consequences of juvenile offenders who commit heinous crimes.
The town of Yale. Skinner, Jonathan Kurtz in the glasses, and James Preston conspired to brutally stab Tia's parents in November of last year. Her father, Paul, was murdered. Her mother, Mara, severely wounded. Here's what the judge said to Tia.
For the premeditated, deliberate murder of your father, you are hereby committed to the Michigan Department of Corrections to be imprisoned for the remainder of your life without any opportunity for parole.
Her two accomplices who carried out the attacks got the same punishment: life for wounding Tia's mother and life without parole for murder. Tia offered an apology, saying she loves.
18-year-old Conrad Schaefer was sentenced for a crime spree in Osceola County that left 2 dead. Conrad Schaefer, 18, pleaded guilty in January to 2 counts of first-degree murder. Schaefer could have been sentenced to 40 years in prison, but instead the judge gave him 2 consecutive life sentences, one for each first-degree murder charge. Schaefer fatally shot David Guerrero, 17, who was on his way to catch a bus for work on June 26, 2013 in Kissimmee. A few days after the killing, Schaefer and 3 of his friends, David Damas, Victoria Rios, and Juan Muriel, forced their way into Eric Rupnarine's Poinciana home, where the 22-year-old was shot and had his throat slit. I was 15 at the time. I'm really sorry for the things I've done, and I know they were wrong, and I know my apology doesn't mean a thing to you. I know it won't change how you feel about me, Schaefer said.
Yes, sir. I would just like to apologize to the families that I've hurt. I know that y'all never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. I know if I was in your position, I'd feel the same way. I was 15 at the time. I'm really sorry for the things I've done. And I know I did wrong, and I know my apology don't mean nothing to you. And I know it ain't gonna change how you feel about me. But I just feel like I need to apologize, and I really am sorry for what I've done. And I know I gotta do the time, and I mean, I'm sorry for what I did, but I wish it never happened. I wish I could take it back. I wish I could change things, but I can't. I'm really sorry. sorry to all the families I hurt.
Is that all?
I just want to say I hope you guys forgive me one day. I'm really getting sorry.
Kripanen Rupnarine, Eric Rupnarine's grandfather, said Schaefer's apology was not the way to apologize to someone. Dolores Horn, the victim's aunt, said she wished she could take Schaefer out back and hold a gun to his head so he would know how Eric felt. She said Schaefer is worse than an animal. Maybe someday we'll know why people like Mr. Schaefer exist, but for the safety of this community, under that answer is known, Mr. Schaefer can't be free, said prosecutor Jeff Ashton.
But at this point, Your Honor, our position is that the defendant must be sentenced to life in prison with a review hearing in 25 years. If at that point there is some clear understanding of why he committed this crime, then a judge at that point may want to reconsider. But at that 25-year hearing, the court can only reduce the sentence, it can't increase it. And I don't want that judge 25 years from now, if Mr. Schaefer is still as dangerous as he is today, to not be able to keep us safe from him for the rest of his life. So the state's position is the defendant should be sentenced to life in prison for both of these offenses. Whether they're concurrent or consecutive is largely an academic question. We have agreed at the time of the plea, because the interpretation of the statute is still somewhat unknown, that his review hearing of both sentences, whether they are...
Elizabeth Olton was a 9-year-old girl who was murdered by her neighbor, Alyssa Bustamante, who was 15 at the time. In St. Martins, Missouri, on October 21st, Bustamante lured Olton into the woods before strangling and stabbing her to death. Bustamante murdered Olton simply due to homicidal ideation and to see what it was like to kill someone. She was later indicted and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of conditional release in 2024 for second-degree murder. However, due to her additional conviction of armed criminal action, even if she was granted conditional release in 2024, which was denied, she will have a consecutive sentence of 30 years in prison. This makes her earliest probable release in 2054, when she will be 60 years old. Olton lived 4 houses down from Bustamante. On October 21st, 2000, Bustamante convinced her younger sister to bring Olton to the forest by their homes to hang out. Upon Olton's arrival, Bustamante strangled Olton, slit her throat, and stabbed her 8 times in the chest. Bustamante then buried Olton's body in a grave that she had dug 5 days before in the woods behind her house and covered the grave with leaves.
For fun.
No one was in that shallow grave.
No Elizabeth. And time is ticking on this missing persons case, now nearing the 48-hour mark.
Bustamante's grandparents, Gary and Karen Brooke, took legal custody of her and her 3 younger siblings in 2002, since her mother, Michelle, had addiction issues and her father, Caesar, was serving time in prison. Friends started noticing changes in Alyssa around 2007 when she was hospitalized after a suicide attempt. On her YouTube profile, she listed cutting under her hobbies. She had also posted a photograph of herself on social media where she held 2 fingers to her head, pretending to shoot herself. After the murder on the same day, Bustamante wrote in her journal, though later she attempted to scribble it out, "I just effing killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them, now they're dead. I don't know how to feel, ATM." It was amazing. As soon as you get over the, "oh my god, I can't do this" feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kind of nervous and shaky though, right now. Okay, I gotta go to church now. LOL. Bustamante first appeared in court on November 17th, 2009, where she pleaded not guilty and was indicted on first-degree murder and armed criminal action. In January 2012, she took a plea deal to the lesser charges of second-degree murder and armed criminal action.
Supreme Court ruled. She says that ruling changed her thinking.
Basically, the main reason for accepting the offer was to avoid the absolute certainty of life without parole. If there was another option, then there would have been no reason to have accepted that offer.
With the trial about to start, Bustamante's current lawyer suggested the girl was under pressure to make an...
A few weeks later, she was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of conditional release for the murder and a consecutive sentence of 30 years for armed criminal action. Her appeal against the sentence was denied in March 2014. The victim's mother, Patricia Price, agreed to settle the lawsuit she filed against Bustamante. The terms of the agreement require Bustamante to disclose any compensation from case coverage to Price. Alyssa was seen by several mental health professionals who all testified that she has major depressive disorder and borderline personality disorder. In July 2024, Bustamante was denied parole. Her next parole hearing is expected to take place in 2029. The brutal murder of Barbara Olson, a 78-year-old woman in Sheboygan Falls, Wisconsin, in September 2012 sent shockwaves through the community. The crime was particularly disturbing as the perpetrators were two teenage boys, Antonio Barbeau and Nathan Poppy, both just 13 years old at the time. The horrific incident unfolded on September 17, 2012, when Barbeau and Poppy hatched a plan to rob Olson, who was Barbeau's great-grandmother. Armed with a hatchet and a hammer, they entered Olson's home under the pretense of a visit. Once inside, they launched a savage attack, bludgeoning Olson repeatedly with the weapons. The attack was so violent that Olson sustained 27 injuries, 18 of which were to her head. After the brutal assault, the two teenagers ransacked Olson's home, stealing jewelry, a purse, and money. They then attempted to dispose of the body by placing it in the trunk of Olson's car, but were unsuccessful. They eventually abandoned the body in the garage, covering it with a blanket. The following day, Barbeau and Pape were arrested after authorities received a tip. During the investigation, Barbeau confessed to the crime, detailing the gruesome attack and the motive behind it. He claimed that he and Pape had planned the robbery to obtain money for drugs and alcohol. The case against the two teenagers proceeded swiftly. Both were charged with first-degree intentional homicide. Barbeau accepted a plea deal and pleaded no contest to the charge, while Pape went to trial. All right, Keepers. During Pape's trial, Barbeau testified against his former friend, providing crucial details about the crime.
Last September,
we were going to try to scare her to get money and then use force if needed.
And when you say use force if needed, was there a discussion about what type of force you might use?
An attack, I guess to kill.
that was a plan Barbeau says he and his 14-year-old friend Nathan Pop started plotting the day before Olson's death. Barbeau said the two hid the weapons in their pants as Pop's mother drove them near Olson's home. Pop and Barbeau entered through Olson's unlocked garage door.
She knew I was on the run and she said she was going to call my mom.
What happened next?
In August 2014, both Barbeau and Pape were sentenced to life in prison, with eligibility for parole after 36 years.
And today, Antonio Barbeau will be eligible for parole on his 50th birthday.
Tom Murray was in court today for the sentencing.
This teenager cried several times during his 3-hour sentencing proceeding. Antonio Barbeau will be eligible for parole on his 50th birthday, but that's by no means a guarantee he'll ever get out of prison. Instead of starting his freshman year in high school, 14-year-old Antonio Barbeau will go to prison. He showed varying emotions in court, at times wiping tears from his face. Then Barbeau smirked and shook his head when the prosecutor spoke. He read only a few words from his own statement.
There's a lot going around said by the news, DA, and many other people that I'm a cold, heartless, careless killer. And that's not true.
Barbeau pled no contest and was convicted of killing his great-grandmother. He and his friend bludgeoned Barbara Olson to death with a hatchet and hammer. The prosecutor says the boys stole $150 and used the cash to buy pizza and pot.
They really don't care about rehabilitation. They just want to put them away so they can't, they understand the seriousness of the crime.
Barbeau will almost certainly start his prison sentence at the Department of Corrections, Lincoln Hills School for Boys, north of Wausau.
Has this crime indeed divided your family?
Yep, sure has. It sure has. Big time. As my mother was the matriarch of the family.
Accomplice and friend Nathan Pop is scheduled to be sentenced in that same courtroom first thing tomorrow morning. In Sheboygan, Tom Murray, today's TM.
The judge presiding over the case described the crime as horrific and senseless and expressed shock that two young boys could commit such a heinous act.
Guilty of first-degree intentional homicide.
14-year-old Nathan Pop guilty of brutally murdering a 78-year-old woman, Barbara Olson.
Jurors got the case at noon, and it only took an hour to convict him.
Cody Holyoke was in the courtroom as the verdict was read. He joins us live from Sheboygan. Cody?
Mike and Carol, I have to say this is a strange trial to cover in that you usually see one side of the courtroom cheer when the verdict is read. Not so in this case. Nathan Pop was only 13 when he and a friend murdered Barbara Olson, and I can tell you from being here today and this week, the ages that we're talking about here, the gravity of that is not lost on the families affected.
Blank faces filled the courtroom. This verdict makes no one happy. Two families are torn apart by a brutal crime, and now two teens will live out their adulthood in prison.
The whole situation is just very sad for everyone.
Nikki Olson is the mother of Antonio Barbeau. The teen, along with his friend Nathan Pop, murdered Barbeau's great-grandmother, Nikki's grandmother, in an attempt to get some fast cash.
It's sad for our family. It's sad for the boys and for Nate's family too.
I walked over to Miss Olson and hit her twice with that hammer.
Nathan Pop admitted to striking the woman with a hammer, but he maintained...
The case of Antonio Barbeau and Nathan Pape has raised numerous questions about the factors that can lead young people to commit such violent crimes. Some experts have pointed to the influence of drugs and alcohol, while others have highlighted the role of mental health issues. Additionally, the case has sparked debate about the appropriate punishment for juvenile offenders and the potential for rehabilitation. In the years since the murder, the case has continued to generate interest and controversy. Some have argued that the life sentences imposed on the two teenagers were too harsh, given their young age at the time of the crime. Others have maintained that the sentences were justified, given the brutality of the murder and the need to protect society. The tragic case of Barbara Olson serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of violence. It also underscores the importance of addressing the root causes of crime, including poverty, inequality, and mental health issues, in order to prevent such tragedies from occurring in the future.
The Police Memorial Building. Today is June 23rd. Do you know what time it is? Do you have any idea what time it is?
Case 1. Christian Fernandez. Abused from age 3, Christian was angry and violent toward other kids. At age 12, he murdered his 2-year-old half-brother as her son lay bleeding and unconscious in the bedroom beside hers. Bianella Susana surfed the internet. She downloaded music, logged into YouTube, checked her online bank account, and searched Pipa and Kate Middleton gossip. She made a couple of medical-related searches, including those for concussion and unconscious for hours. Susana rushed home from running errands after her 12-year-old son, Christian Fernandez, called her around 9 a.m. to say that David fell from his bunk bed and was unconscious. She did not call a doctor nor take the toddler to a hospital until about 5:25 p.m., more than 7 hours after her first search for gets knocked out. Had she taken the toddler to a hospital, he could have survived his injuries. David arrived at the hospital, his eyes rolled back in his head, his body limp. He wore a blue cast over a broken leg, an injury he received the previous January after Christian attacked him. Susana told investigators the injury happened at a playground because she did not want the Department of Children and Family Services to remove them from her care. She waited 2 days to take him to the hospital. Susana left Christian home alone with David and her 5-year-old son while she ran errands. Police charged Susana with manslaughter and took her into custody, yet they felt that something was not right with the story. After finding blood in several rooms and areas of the home, police took Christian to the station for additional questioning.
8:35 in the morning. Can you read, Christian? Can you read English? Do you read Spanish too? I want you to read that top line for me.
Initially, Christian stuck with the story of David falling from the bunk bed. Finally, he came clean, admitting to slamming his brother's head into a bookcase several times because he was angry. When the boy fell unconscious, Christian picked him up and laid him in his bed. He denied intent to kill his brother and several times asked police if doctors could wake him up. Christian made another shocking confession during the police interview. He told police he abused his 5-year-old sibling.
So how can the doctors wake him up? He was gonna have to wake up on his own, or I don't know if they can wake him up, to be honest.
He was taken into custody, charged as an adult with first-degree murder and assault. Prosecutors contend that Christian repeatedly slammed 2-year-old half-brother David Galarraga's head on a bookshelf to kill him. The psychological report shows Fernandez's perception of the death from the Meadows interview. He said that he picked up his younger brother and pushed him into the bookcase. He said that his brother was bleeding and unresponsive, so he carried him to the bed and called his mother. Christian denied any plans or intent to kill his brother. He seemed rather defensive about discussing what triggered his anger. He talked about having a flashback of the abuse by his stepfather as the motive for this offense. Susana became pregnant with Christian at age 11 and gave birth at age 12. His father, 20-year-old Jose Fernandez, said Susana would not leave him alone and came to him to get the love and affection her mother did not give. He left shortly after Christian's birth. She then married a man named Luis Galarraga, who almost immediately began to abuse Christian. When police learned of the abuse, an investigation began. Last year, they issued an arrest warrant for his arrest. Learning this information, Luis fatally shot himself in the head in front of David and the 5-year-old. Susana pleaded guilty to manslaughter. A judge spared her jail time and placed her on probation for 10 years. She admitted in court that Christian had a horrible life and that she should have been a better mother.
Susana came into court today and accepted responsibility for her involvement in the role that she took in David's death, and it's the first of many steps in achieving.
A judge dismissed Christian's confession, citing he did not understand his Miranda rights during police questioning. Without the confession, prosecutors did not have enough evidence to prosecute him on the assault charge. It was dismissed, but the first-degree murder charge stuck. Christian was found guilty of first-degree murder as an adult, but the judge handed down a juvenile life sentence. He was released from juvenile detention in July 2018 at age 19 and placed on probation. The judge also ordered Christian to stay away from minors and not to have contact with his surviving siblings unless they first contacted him. He hardly showed any emotion during his sentence. This is probably because of the childhood trauma he went through.
She what? She killed her mom! She killed her mom? Yeah! That's what I'm screaming about!
Case 2, Carly Gregg, Mississippi teen. Carly Gregg was sentenced to life in prison in September 2024, 6 months after the murder of her mother, Ashley Smiley, and the attempted murder of her stepfather, Heath Smiley. After Carly's trial, many true crime followers became interested in learning more about her and her story. Carly was 14 years old when she killed her 40-year-old mother on March 19, 2024, at their family's home in Brandon, Mississippi. Home surveillance footage captured the teen walking around the home with a .38 Heidelberg 3.57 Magnum pistol from beneath her parents' mattress behind her back, followed by the sound of several gunshots, according to Newsweek. She tried to shoot her stepfather also, but the bullet hit his arm and he was able to wrestle her, and then placed a call to 911 later on.
She killed her mom? Yeah! That's what I'm screaming about! Where's the mom? When I do this, she tried to kill me! Where's the mom?
Prosecutors claimed at Carly's trial in September 2024 that the shooting took place hours after a friend told Ashley, who was a math teacher, about Carly's marijuana use. Carly's mom reportedly searched her daughter's room and found vape pens just before the shooting. Carly shot Ashley 3 times in her bedroom before returning to the kitchen and texting 39-year-old Heath about when he would be home, the security footage revealed. Prosecutors alleged that Carly then invited a friend over and asked if they were squeamish around dead bodies before showing them her deceased mother on the floor of Carly's bedroom. Carly then allegedly waited for her stepfather to return home and shot him in the shoulder. Heath was able to wrestle the gun away from the teen, and she ran out of the house, according to multiple reports. Carly was captured soon afterward near the house. Carly's lawyers did not deny that she killed Ashley. However, they argued that she was experiencing a mental health crisis on the day of the murder and did not remember the shooting. They asked the jury to find her not guilty by reason of insanity. Newsweek reported. She was having mood issues, eating disorder issues, cutting herself, hearing voices, and sleeping difficulty, all leading up to January of 2024. Dr. Andrew Clark testified on September 17, 2024, concluding that Carly had bipolar disorder. Dr. Clark also claimed that Carly was previously prescribed medication to treat symptoms of depression.
Did she ever report to you that she was hearing voices of any sort?
No.
Did she ever report that she was having any sort of hallucinations?
No.
The prosecution's expert witness psychiatrist, Dr. Jason Pickett, refuted the claim that Carly was unaware of her actions when she was killing her mother, calling her crime diabolical and claiming that she had narcissistic tendencies.
Does not meet Mississippi's standard for insanity at the time of the offense, and that she knew the nature, quality, and wrongfulness of her actions.
After 2 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a guilty verdict on September 20th, 2024. She was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for first-degree murder and attempted murder, as well as 10 years in prison for tampering with evidence. Multiple outlets reported the sentences will run concurrently. Carly broke into sobs as her guilty verdict was read, but she regained her composure and remained stoic during her sentencing. Carly Gregg is evil, and that's not easy to say. But the truth of the matter is that sometimes evil comes in young packages. Rankin County District Attorney Bubba Bramlett said, according to Newsweek, Carly's defense team plans to appeal the decision. The outlet reported. Case 3. Heavenly Arroyo. Heavenly Arroyo, an 18-year-old Fall River woman who 3 years ago stabbed a 68-year-old woman to death inside her relative's home, pleaded guilty in Fall River Superior Court to second-degree murder. Bristol County District Attorney Thomas M. Quinn III announced the defendant was sentenced by Judge Rene Dupuis to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 19 years.
Prosecutors say she stabbed 68-year-old Ana Vasquez Rodriguez to death in the home that belongs to Arroyo's great uncle.
On October 6, 2019, the defendant entered Ana Vasquez Rodriguez's bedroom and stabbed her 70 times. The homicide took place in the Johnson Street home of the defendant's great uncle, who had taken custody of the defendant at the request of the defendant's mother a week prior to the killing. The victim was the mother of the great uncle's girlfriend. On October 6, the great uncle and his girlfriend were planning on taking the defendant to New York to visit another relative and obtain some legal documents in order to help the couple to formally gain custody of the troubled defendant. The trip, however, was delayed due to car problems. As the day wore on, the defendant became increasingly agitated and impatient. Then, late in the afternoon, the defendant retrieved a pair of scissors from the kitchen, went up to the victim's bedroom, and murdered her. The victim was bedridden after suffering a stroke and could not defend herself. At the time of the killing, the only other person inside the home was the victim's grandson, who was playing a video game with a headset on. After killing the victim, the defendant showered, disposed of her clothing in a nearby dumpster, and told the victim's grandson that his grandmother wasn't well. When the grandson looked in on his grandmother, he immediately called 911 and police arrived shortly thereafter. At first, the defendant claimed she was outside with the dog and witnessed a masked man running from the home, but while in custody, she made a series of inculpatory, spontaneous admissions. The case was prosecuted by Assistant District Attorneys Dennis Collins and Mary Claire Flynn. This case was a tragedy for everyone involved. The defendant brutally murdered the victim, who was only trying to help her move forward with her life. The defendant was 15 at the time and suffering from mental health issues. However, the facts of the case clearly show she is a danger to the community, and the state prison's sentence is appropriate. District Attorney Quinn said, "My heart goes out to the victim's family, who was present in court yesterday. There's nothing any of them could have done to prevent this terrible incident from occurring. "I hope the resolution of this case brings some closure to them and they can try to move forward with their lives."
There was no doubt in my mind. I thought I was going home.
And why was there no doubt in your mind?
Because he promised me I was going home.
Case 4. Keandra Cook. The tragic events surrounding the shooting of Emmanuel Purcell, a young man lured into a robbery orchestrated by Keandra Cook, unfolded in a matter of minutes. Cook, a then 18-year-old student at Mainland High School, used a dating app to entice Purcell and another man to a secluded location under the pretense of a marijuana deal and encounter. However, Cook's intentions were far from innocent. She had conspired with her boyfriend to ambush the unsuspecting victims and rob them. As Purcell and his companion arrived at the designated spot, Cook's boyfriend emerged from the shadows armed with a gun. A chaotic struggle ensued, resulting in Purcell being shot and critically injured. The incident sent shockwaves through the community, highlighting the dangers of online interactions and the devastating consequences of impulsive actions. Cook's actions led to severe charges, including carjacking, attempted carjacking with a deadly weapon, and battery. While she was not the one who pulled the trigger, she was deemed responsible for orchestrating the events that led to Purcell's shooting. Cook apologized for the crime before her sentencing, but that changed nothing.
Ms. Cook, you're before the court for sentencing. A couple of things going in your favor. One, you didn't hold a firearm during these episodes. The second is that the victim luckily survived.
As the judge handed down the sentence, the courtroom fell silent. Once a bright-eyed kid, Keandra Cook was now dealing with the fallout from her disastrous scheme. A 20-year prison sentence stood in her way, a sobering reminder of the seriousness of what she had done. Cook's mother fell on the ground in shock and disbelief as the judge's remarks reverberated throughout the room. A tragic tribute to the misery and suffering that had befallen their family. Her sobs of anguish filled the air.
I'm going to adjudicate you guilty of all three offenses. As to count 3, I'm going to sentence you to 11 years Florida State Prison, Department of Corrections.
Her daughter's once bright and promising life had been permanently changed as a result of a careless choice. In addition to ruining the lives of the victims, Cook's actions had a lasting negative impact on her own prospects.
Nettles worked at the Little Caesars pizza shop on Welch and Chevrolet. A co-worker who did not want to go on camera described Nettles as a nice guy.
Case 5. Jiwan Wickware. Unlike most cases, Jiwan's case has raised a lot of questions. Many are questioning if the sentence was a fair one. Let's dive into the story. When he was 16, he and another young kid robbed a pizza delivery man. Both kids were armed with guns. Tragically, his friend shot and killed the man. Although this was Jiwan's first offense, and despite a documented learning disability, troubled home environment, and a psychological evaluation concluding that Jiwan could be rehabilitated, the judge sentenced Jiwan to life in prison with no possibility of parole, LWOP. The boy who pulled the trigger was acquitted because a witness could not identify him. Wickware, now 20, was 16 at the time of Nettles' death. Heyman originally sentenced him in August 2013 to life in prison without parole. He was the first juvenile in the state who faced the possibility of life without parole in Michigan, following the U.S. Supreme Court's 2012 ruling that declared mandatory life sentences without parole for juveniles unconstitutional. The resentencing hearing was held for Wickware after a law was signed by Governor Rick Snyder, allowing judges to sentence juvenile killers to a term of years in prison rather than life without parole. "I just feel like a wrong has been righted," said Wickware's attorney, Jody Hemingway. First-degree felony murder was statutorily punishable by life in prison without parole at the time of Wickware's original sentencing. However, a law signed by Governor Rick Snyder in March gave judges the discretion to sentence teen killers to life in prison, or 25 to more than 60 years in prison, to comply with the Supreme Court decision. The new law also applied to teens whose cases were on direct appeal at the time of its signing. Wickware was appealing his conviction when Snyder signed the law, and Genesee County Prosecutor David Layton's office agreed to remand the case back to Heyman for the resentencing hearing, since the judge did not have the option to originally sentence Wickware to a term of years in prison. Layton's office pushed for Heyman to stand by the original sentence. "Our position was he should be sentenced to life without parole," Layton said. Heyman could not be reached for comment on the sentence. Wickware's original sentence was handed down following 2 days of testimony that explored Wickware's mental status race, criminal history, and upbringing. A woman who was in Nettles' Jeep with him as he delivered pizza said that Nettles was initially shot in the back outside of the vehicle. He then made it back inside the Jeep, where he was shot again. Nettles managed to drive away from the scene before his vehicle came to a rest after crashing into a fire hydrant.
Near a home down the block, and after being shot multiple times by the alleged robber, he actually got into his SUV and drove until he could no more. Nettles worked at the Little Caesars pizza shop on Welch and Chevrolet. A co-worker.
Hemingway argued that Wickware aided and abetted in Nettles' killing, but did not actually fire the shots that killed him. She said that the Supreme Court's decision showed that sentences of life in prison without parole should be reserved for the most egregious cases. However, Layton said Wickware shouldn't get a pass just because his shots missed. I think it was an egregious crime, Layton said. Wickware is one of 14 killers who have been convicted of first-degree murder in Genesee County following the Supreme Court's decision.
Blank in his car, then dragged his body out of the car, robbed him of his wallet, took a photo of the dead body and sent it to a friend, was then the next day found with that friend who he sent the picture to, using the dead victim's credit card at an ATM where he attempted to take out $500.
Case 6, Anthony Uckleberry.
$250,000 with the added condition of house arrest.
In 2019, Anthony Uckleberry, a 16-year-old, committed a crime that shocked the Las Vegas community. The victim was Hersey Addison, a 75-year-old Vietnam veteran working as an unarmed security guard at an apartment complex. On the day of the incident, Addison was sitting in his car, reportedly doing a crossword puzzle while patrolling the area, when he was approached and fatally shot. Uckleberry was later charged with Addison's murder, a crime described as brutal and senseless. The case unfolded when police discovered Addison's wallet and credit cards were missing after the murder. Investigators quickly began tracking any activity related to these cards. Shortly after the murder, Uckleberry and a friend attempted to use the stolen credit cards at a gas station. Surveillance footage from the station showed the two young men trying to withdraw money using Addison's cards, and after being flagged for fraud, authorities were alerted. Surveillance video led investigators to Del Sol Academy, a local high school where Uckleberry was a student.
He was shaking at times. The teen faces charges of murder, robbery, burglary, and using a credit card without consent. His defense argued that he needs to be back in school and asked the court for a bail of $55,000. But prosecutors said it's important to note Uckleberry was arrested in class.
Police arrested Uckleberry on school grounds, where they found him in possession of a handgun. Evidence gathered by the police, including ballistics and fingerprints, linked the weapon to the murder scene. Blood spatter was also found on Uckleberry's gun, and ballistic analysis confirmed that the shell casing at the scene matched rounds in his possession. During questioning, Uckleberry initially denied involvement, claiming he was only near the crime scene and blaming the shooting on a homeless man. However, police found Addison's identification and additional stolen items at the home of an acquaintance who had reportedly supplied Uckleberry with the gun. Uckleberry eventually pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, acknowledging his role in Addison's death. During the court proceedings, his defense team portrayed his actions as a result of youthful impulsiveness and poor judgment, whereas the prosecution highlighted the calculated nature of the crime and the immense loss to Addison's family and the community. Uckleberry received a life sentence, with eligibility for parole only after 18 years.
Life behind bars for a brutal killing of a security guard. 19-year-old Anthony Uckleberry was sentenced yesterday and will not have the possibility for parole for 18 years.
The murder of Addison underscored significant concerns about juvenile violence and security risks in residential areas, especially given that Addison, a decorated war veteran, had taken on a job he likely viewed as low risk in his retirement years.
Cleaned up the evidence, then took his wallet to buy new shoes and drugs. During the investigation, Henderson police found 2 videos of the 2 suspects inside the house, with one of them holding a gun.
Case 7. Cody Harlan and Jaden Caruso. Cody Harlan, 19, and Jaden Caruso, 18, were found guilty in August of first-degree murder and robbery with a deadly weapon in connection with the June 8, 2018 shooting. Harlan also was convicted of being an accessory to murder. Both will be eligible for parole in 20 years.
With first-degree murder back in June of 2018 when the murder took place. In the arrest report, Caruso and Harlan, who were tried as adults, initially told police they were playing a game of Russian roulette in an empty house.
As parents, we're just not supposed to bury our children, Herndon said, not in just situations that are preventable, but in situations that are mind-boggling. Prosecutors have said Caruso, 16 at the time, fired the fatal shot and afterwards shared a video of Matthew's body in a pool of blood on Snapchat, while Harlan, 17 at the time, took cash from the victim's pockets. "Bro," Caruso said in the Snapchat video, "I just caught a body." The pair returned to the house at 2736 Cool Lilac Ave shortly afterward to clean up the scene and hide Matthew's body inside a downstairs closet under a plastic sheet. Harlan dragged the body into the closet, police have said. Matthew had a very trusting heart, and he was never good at seeing the ugly or the bad that some people possessed. His mother, Jamie Minkler, said Tuesday, "My Matthew just didn't have that kind of heart." At trial, Harlan's attorney, Ryan Helmick, conceded that his client was guilty of accessory to murder, but pointed to Caruso for the more serious charges, arguing that Harlan was asleep on a couch in the living room at the time of the shooting.
Matt Minkler didn't plan to kill him. He didn't murder him. Why? Who is he?
Caruso's lawyer, Macy Polsky, acknowledged to jurors that Caruso fired the .357 caliber revolver that killed Matthew, but the attorney blamed drugs and alcohol for the shooting. "My deepest apologies to you and everyone who has suffered from the loss of Matthew," Caruso said to Matthew's family before he was sentenced. "There was no plan to hurt your son." When it was Harlan's turn to speak, he read from a lengthy statement he had prepared, saying he never thought in a million years he could be convicted of first-degree murder for falling asleep on a couch. "I appreciate some of what you said, Mr. Harlan, but the reality is, in cases like this, it's not always about who pulled the trigger. I mean, you can sit up there as long as you want, and every night you're in prison and say, 'I didn't kill this man,'" Herndon said. "But so many of these situations arise because of a combination of factors and a combination of people." During the hearing, Matthew's family packed the courtroom gallery. "Losing you has left me with a broken heart and no way of healing, just trying to make it to the next day," said one of his older sisters, Desiree Roberts. "This has left an empty hole in our family." Matthew was the youngest of 6 siblings, and Jamie and Stephen Minkler's only child together. He was a junior at Silverado High School at the time of his death and would have graduated in May. He loved playing video games, was a Packers fan, and he dreamed of one day starting his own company, according to this family. He leaves behind his parents, siblings, 3 nieces, and a 1-year-old nephew named for him.
"I pray for the victims' forgiveness daily and tremendously. I hope that one day I'll be forgiven. I also apologize to the victims' loved ones."
Case 8. Terry Berger Smith, a teenager who pleaded no contest in court to kidnapping and raping a woman and live streaming the crime in Hollywood, was sentenced to 41 years in prison.
Smith attacked his 21-year-old victim as she walked to work in Hollywood. He beat her, threatened her, forced her into FaceTimed a friend while he was doing it.
On Friday, Broward County Circuit Judge Peter Holden sentenced 17-year-old Terry Berger Smith in connection to the rape of a woman on a Hollywood sidewalk back on June 10, 2022. "I sentenced Mr. Smith at this time to the lowest permissible range under the sentencing guidelines, to 495 months in a Florida state prison. This equates to 41.24 years, said Holden. Berger Smith was 14 years old at the time of the crime when prosecutors said he stalked a woman and approached her on the 300 block of South Park Road at around 4 a.m., all within walking distance of the Hollywood Police Department headquarters. Authorities said Berger Smith was following the victim, who was walking to work when he ambushed her, pushed her into bushes nearby, and assaulted her multiple times. He live-streamed the crime and was heard telling the victim he had AIDS. After the Broward State Attorney's Office considered the facts and evidence against Berger Smith, a panel of senior prosecutors decided the responsible course of action was to file criminal charges in the adult system. Berger Smith entered a plea of no contest. His attorney asked the judge for leniency, as his client was only 14 at the time of the crime, and to sentence him to 6 years in prison instead of 44 years. Before the judge gave his sentencing, Berger Smith apologized to the victim's family and begged the judge for a short sentence. "I would like my freedom. I would like a chance to be a normal person and not a criminal and not a menace to society," he said.
"I hope that one day I'll be forgiven. I also apologize to the victim's loved ones."
However, when the victim's mother took the stand, she told the judge he didn't deserve a second chance or a lighter sentence. The terror and suffering that the victim went through at the hands of this person, who, despite being underage, committed an adult crime, has left scars on her soul, said the victim's mother. It is devastating to witness the profound impact this cruel act has had on the victim's life. She asked the judge to set an example despite Burger Smith's age. The sentencing of this person, despite his age, must reflect the severity of his actions and serve as a deterrent to others who seek to commit such acts of violence, said the victim's mother. She added, deliver a sentence that not only holds this person accountable for his actions, but also sends a clear message that such behavior, regardless of age, will not be tolerated in our society.
He was just 14 when he committed a brutal rape. A judge sentenced him to 495 months in prison, more than 41 years. He'll be on probation for the rest of his life.
The judge agreed and sentenced the 17-year-old to 4 decades in prison.
To look past.
The defense seeks a downward departure in juvenile sanctions. Certainly the age would qualify it, but the facts of this case.
After sentencing, the mother spoke to 7 News to thank the Hollywood Police Department and Broward State Attorney's Office. I really would just like to thank the police department. State's attorney, they did really good work. I feel like they did the best they could, and I feel like what would happen is fair, said the victim's mother. Burger Smith's parents also took the stand before sentencing to express how hard it's been to comprehend why their son would commit such a heinous crime. How did we get here? That's a good question. I'm trying to understand myself, said Robert Smith, Terry's father. I didn't raise my kid knowing that one day he'd do such a thing, and I'm ashamed because I feel like maybe I missed something, said Severine Smith, Terry's mother. Burger Smith will be 58 years old when he is released from the Florida State Prison. He has 30 days to appeal his sentence. What are your thoughts on these 9 cases? Were the punishments just too harsh, or maybe not harsh enough? Mackenzie, 17 years of age, is guilty of murder. She was responsible for a car accident that killed not just her boyfriend, but also his friend. The deceased, Dominic Russo, her boyfriend, and his friend, Davin Flanagan, were both in the car when Sharilla crashed into the side of a commercial billboard while driving at 100 miles per hour. Both men were found dead, with Sharilla as the only survivor. Prosecutors laid down an argument that the teens had a toxic relationship and that Sharilla had already made not just threats, but violent ones against her boyfriend, with clear evidence that she had once tried to break into his house. Reports claim that Sharilla crashed the car on purpose, with a clear intention of wanting to kill her boyfriend, with his friend just a victim of circumstance. With visual evidence, the prosecutor concluded it was not an accident, but indeed intentional, stating, "You can see her driving, and then making the right turn, and then all evidence indicates that she immediately puts her foot on the pedal and drove towards a building at 100 door Malpapia." I think those really demonstrated to us that this was no accident.
You see her driving very calmly and making the right turn, and then all evidence indicates she immediately put the pedal to the metal and drove straight into a building at 100 miles per hour. I think those really demonstrated to us that this was no accident.
But it's not just that. Evidence also showed that a few days before the incident, Sharilla took the same route and cooked up a plan, which was one of the main pieces of evidence the judge used to confirm her guilt. After being found guilty, she was placed in handcuffs and then allowed to speak. Her words, "I am so deeply sorry. I hope one day you can see that I would never let this happen or do it on purpose. I wish I could remember what happened. I'm just so heartbroken."
The families of Dom and Davion, I'm so deeply sorry. I hope one day you can see I would never let this happen or do it on purpose. I wish I could remember what happened. I'm just so sorry. I'm heartbroken. I love Dom and Davion. We were all friends and Dom was my soulmate. I wish I could take all your pain away. And I'm so sorry. And to my family, thank you for the support and all the love you guys give. Thank you for fighting with me. I love you all so much. All right, I'm done. Thank you. Thank you.
The judge also gave a statement saying, "There was no medical condition that caused this, nor was there any mechanical failure of the car. A failed suicide attempt is not a defense to murder. And Mackenzie, there is a very good likelihood that you will spend the rest of your life in prison." She was then sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Shondell Jackson, 18, is in Milwaukee courthouse for the murder of a university student. According to reports, Jackson and his friends were out hunting for victims when they came across Potter, the deceased, as he was leaving a bar. The 21-year-old victim was a student at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Reports claimed Jackson and his friends stalked Potter before harassing him and demanding money. However, Potter had no money on him, which annoyed Jackson, and the offender pulled out a gun and shot Potter. According to police officials, Jackson fled to Mississippi a day after he murdered Potter in cold blood, but his uncle had already tipped law enforcement about the offender's whereabouts, leading to his arrest and trial. While Jackson was being escorted out of the courtroom, he did something strange and disturbing. Jackson was seen making gestures to the victim's family while also wearing a big smile. Despite his entire situation being clear to him, did he feel no remorse? Or was it just an act of fear? Moments before Jackson's sentencing, his mother had a few words to say. According to her, she first heard about the incident on TV. When I saw it on the news, I started crying. I'm like, oh my God, I can't imagine what that mother is going through. I never had a clue that my child had anything to do with it. My son is not a monster. He is not a monster.
I saw it on the news, I even cried. I'm like, oh my God, I can't imagine what that mother is going through. I never had a clue that my child had anything to do with it. My son is not a monster. He is not a monster.
Jackson also came up with an apology, pleading to the court to spare his life. However, the court sentenced him to life imprisonment without parole, resulting in an outburst from Jackson, but he was restrained.
Human life and the need to protect the community, which I also fear for with Mr. Jackson being out in the community. I am going to go ahead on count 1, the first-degree intentional homicide conviction, and I am going to sentence Mr. Jackson to life imprisonment without possibility for extended supervision.
While Jackson was being taken away, we could hear one of his family members screaming at the victim's family, "I hate you all. I hate you all." Meanwhile, Jackson's friend pleaded guilty to acting as a lookout during the murder and theft and was sentenced to 12 years in prison.
Case rises to that level.
Aiden Fucci was just 14 when he murdered his classmate, a girl from Patriots Oak Academy who was aged 13. He reportedly stabbed her 114 times before dumping her into the woods. Her body was eventually recovered in the woods. When Fucci got arrested, he was seen taking videos in the back of a cop's car and also posting it on Snapchat.
We're having fun in a f***ing cop car.
Yep. Tristan.
What's up, guys?
Yep.
Tristan, if you f***ing walk out the damn...
When you see this in a month...
A video surfaced with his parents speaking to him in an interrogation room. That Snapchat you did was not very smart at all. You are all over the news, Aiden. This is very serious. This is your whole life. Your whole life and ours.
That Snapchat you did was not very smart.
Now we have people want to burn our house down, our cars down. Because of that Snapchat thing you did. It's all over, you're all over the internet, everywhere. Social media.
It is on social media. You'll probably come stay with me after we get done with this. Just for your well, safe being.
This is serious, man.
It's very serious.
This is no joke. This is your whole life. Your whole life.
And ours.
And ours. And your brothers and sisters. And don't forget, they can't go to school tomorrow. Because the kids will hurt them.
Prosecutors brought forward a video allegedly showing Fucci and the girl walking together right before she was murdered. Then, in the same video, Fucci was seen running away from the exact area where the body was found, stabbed 114 times. He was seen running away from that area about 90 minutes after they strolled in together. The body was found with 49 defensive wounds, 35 wounds to the head, 35 wounds to the neck, and 29 wounds to the back and shoulder, accompanied by 6 fatal wounds. What a horrifying scene. However, Fucci pleaded guilty to first-degree murder while he awaited the judge's decision, which went as follows. having entered a plea of guilty to the crime of first-degree murder, I sentence you to life in prison. Because of your age, you are eligible for review of the sentence in 25 years.
I just want to say I plead out guilty, and that I'm sorry for the Bailey family and my family.
Okay. Okay. I'm sure there'll be an opportunity, obviously, at sentencing.
After Fucci was sentenced, he stood still with very little movement. You truly wonder if he felt bad for such a terrible act.
Little son. This afternoon, a jury convicted Dylan Shoemaker of the highest charge possible in this case. He beat Austin Smith to death because the boy wouldn't stop crying. That child was just 23 months old. News 4's Rich Newberg is live.
Dylan Shoemaker is being convicted for second-degree murder at a Buffalo, New York courthouse. Shoemaker, who is 16, was babysitting his girlfriend's child when she went to work in a Springville home, which he shared with his parents. Later in the evening of that same day, Shoemaker did something terrifying. He beat the 23-month-old child until the child sustained multiple injuries, which eventually resulted in his death. Shoemaker was eventually arrested and charged with the murder of a toddler, along with multiple other charges, including child abuse. According to findings, Shoemaker was reportedly making an attempt to stop the toddler from crying, and he claimed he never wanted to hurt the child or take his life. However, the jurors didn't buy Shoemaker's story and believed it was an intentional attempt. And so, Shoemaker was convicted of second-degree murder as Shoemaker entered the courtroom. Even before he got a seat at the defense table, he was already seen tearing up and telling everyone in the courtroom how sorry he was. I really didn't mean to kill Oscar. I didn't know. I really think I did, but I didn't mean to hurt him. While Shoemaker was awaiting his trial, he had a conversation with his mother, which was recorded. The judge then proceeded to read out the conversation Shoemaker had with his mother. In your phone call to your mother from the holding center, you stated, and I quote from the court reporter, "I'm a 16-year-old blonde. Probably all I have to do is cry in front of the jury, and they'll believe me and feel sorry for me. I can't take back what was done. I wish I could give my life for Austin." Shoemaker was eventually sentenced to 25 years, which was later modified and reduced to 18 years to life imprisonment. Jennifer Mee is a 19-year-old in the Pinellas County Justice Center. She was arrested for first-degree murder, but this isn't the first time Jennifer is claiming the spotlight. Back when Jennifer was 15, she had a case of something you might not even think exists: uncontrollable hiccups. She was even known as the Hiccup Girl. However, her hiccups finally got cured and the media no longer had interest in her. But it seems it's just written in the stars for Jennifer to be famous. Almost 4 years later, she got arrested for allegedly setting up a robbery with victims she had met online.
Year-old girl suffering from a peculiar ailment, nonstop hiccuping, but her innocent demeanor quickly changed after prosecutors convicted Jennifer Mee of murder. Now for the first time from behind bars and on the heels of...
She reportedly recruited her boyfriend, Lamont Newton, and another friend, Laren Rayford, to help rob victims. Mee lured a 22-year-old man she met online into a vacant home, and her two friends shot and killed the man, all for $50. The three friends and allies were all staying together and ended up getting arrested a few hours after their operation. When Mee first got arrested and was in jail, she had a phone call with her mom, where she confessed her involvement in a conversation that was recorded. In the call, Mee also claimed she didn't kill anyone. She was just there at the wrong time and in the wrong place. She also said to her mom, "I set everything up and it all went down wrong." However, the jury returned a guilty verdict, and Mee was found guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole, while being given 30 days to appeal. Her allies, Rayford and Newton, were also convicted of felony and first-degree murder and were sentenced to life in prison. Nicholas Lindsay is a 17-year-old from St. Petersburg who is appearing in Pinellas County Court for committing a crime that led him to be guilty of first-degree murder, resulting in life imprisonment. Amanda Crawford, the daughter of St. Petersburg police officer David Crawford, lost her father after a deadly confrontation with Nicholas Lindsay on February 21st. Officer Crawford responded to a call about a possible burglary near a field where the caller claimed to have seen a man holding a brick. The officer quickly arrived at the scene and, upon getting there, spotted the burglar, who was later identified as Nicholas Lindsay. Perhaps due to the fact that Lindsay was a teenager, Crawford deluded himself into thinking he had the situation under control. According to police reports, Nicholas Lindsay opened fire on David Crawford as the officer attempted to reach for a notepad. Every single shot Lindsay fired was exactly at the spot in which he aimed the gun at Crawford's body. Crawford did manage to release 6 rounds, but none of the bullets came into contact with Lindsay as he fled. Crawford was found by another officer who immediately called for medical support. However, it was too late, as David Crawford was pronounced dead at Bayfront Health Center. His death quickly made the news and led to a massive manhunt for the killer, which also drew interest from over 200 police officers from different agencies around Tampa Bay. The police received several tips that led to a raid on the apartment where Nicholas Lindsay lived with his mother. After finding out what had happened, Lindsay's mother persuaded him to man up and tell the cops what happened. And he did. He confessed to the killing of Officer David Crawford. In his confession, Lindsay claimed he had shot Crawford in the stomach with a gun he bought for $140 off the streets a week before the incident. The 16-year-old also told the police he couldn't remember how many times he fired at Crawford. It was, however, revealed later by the police that Lindsay fired 4 rounds at the unaware police officer before fleeing the scene and throwing the murder weapon into a creek. This case has attracted a lot of media attention because Crawford was the 3rd police officer to be murdered in St. Petersburg in the space of a month, which led to the courthouse being unsurprisingly packed with reporters the next day as Lindsay was formally charged with the murder of the police officer. Lindsay, who had been previously charged in juvenile systems, found a court murder trial unfamiliar territory for the teenager. Lindsay shockingly showed little emotion inside the courtroom as his father broke into tears and apologized to the relatives and friends of the murdered officer. The visibly disoriented father said, "On behalf of me, my son, and the entire family, we send our deepest condolences to his family and his colleagues that he worked with. This is my only son, and I'm sorry it happened." Officer Crawford's partner also spoke inside the courtroom and explained how difficult it is to forgive Lindsay, despite it being a required thing to do. According to his faith, after a week of trial, Lindsay was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Although he was tried as an adult, 17, his age was still pivotal in helping him avoid a death penalty. 2 years later, Lindsay's life sentence was upheld in court following an appeal, and everyone was shocked when Lindsay smiled on hearing the judge's ruling. This reaction especially shocked David Crawford's daughter, who was appalled by his lack of remorse. While speaking to reporters, Crawford's daughter called out Lindsay's behavior in court, saying it just proves that the convicted felon is an animal. Miller and Goodale, at just the age of 16, are both charged with the murder of their high school Spanish teacher over a bad grade, as reported. Miller: "We then moved her off of the trail where I struck her, and she died as a result." The pair attended Fairfield High School in southeastern Iowa. Nohema Graber was the Spanish teacher who gave Miller, one of her students, a bad grade. He and his friend Goodale then planned to kill her. "We discussed the general plan. I'll stand here as a lookout and wait for Miss Graber to show up," said Jeremy. Miss Graber went for her usual walk at the city park, where the boys knew she would be, and they stalked her to ambush her. As soon as she arrived, Miller hit her in the head, and in an attempt to ensure she was dead, he hit her a couple more times. They then dragged her into the woods and stomped her to death with a baseball bat. However, there wasn't a plan after that, as the boys simply hid her body and hoped no one would find it. But not long after, the boys were arrested, with alleged documents in the courts claiming that a witness who knew the pair showed law agencies Snapchat messages that proved Miller and Goodale were involved in the murder of their teacher. One of the Snapchat messages read, "You are my Spanish teacher, and this is the last thing you'll ever see." Jeremy later pled guilty and testified against his best friend Miller, stating, "I understood that he had the intent to kill Miss Graber." Goodale also spoke before his sentence and claimed to have had time to reflect on what he did. He also apologized and said every day he wishes he could go back and stop himself, and he can't comprehend the thought of losing a loved one the way his teacher's family did. The judge then handed down his judgment. The defendants shall be sentenced to life with possible parole after 25 years. As for Miller, who apologized before receiving the sentence and took responsibility for the role he played in the murder of his Spanish teacher, he pleaded with the family of the deceased to give him another chance, stating that he didn't want to be institutionalized and didn't want to be in for so long. He expressed that he looked forward to getting through the situation.
I'd like to take this opportunity to wholeheartedly accept responsibility for the role that I've played in the murder of Newman Graber. I would like to apologize for my actions, first and foremost, to the family. I'm sincerely sorry for the distress that I've caused you and the devastation I've caused your family. With all of my heart, I'm sorry for your loss.
The judge then passed judgment on Miller with life under parole for 35 years. Miller didn't seem fazed by the judgment.
Jeremy Goodale's is set for August 23rd. Prosecutors are recommending a sentence between 30 years to life in prison with the possibility of parole.
Brandon Spencer was charged in the Los Angeles County Superior Court with 4 counts of attempted murder. Spencer, 19, attended a crowded Halloween party on the University of Southern California campus in Los Angeles, where gunshots suddenly went off, causing mayhem. Everyone scattered, while some ran in fear, others hid. Reportedly, Spencer also ran, but was stopped in a parking lot, where he was picked up by the Los Angeles Police Department for questioning. A couple of days later, Spencer was charged with 4 counts of attempted murder. He had injured 4 people, but fortunately, none of them died. He was so intent on killing the 4 people that he opened fire on a crowd.
That if you are so intent on killing someone that you're willing to shoot them and at the same time open fire into a crowd.
Prosecutors argued during the trial that the shooting was the result of a conflict between Spencer and a rival gang member. "I'm not a bad person, but I made a mistake," said Spencer. He maintained his innocence throughout the trial, but the jury didn't agree with him.
I'm not a bad person, but I made mistakes. I'm not just some gangbanger that she tried to portray me as.
Spencer had close to 50 family members and friends in the courtroom. As the judge read his sentence, Spencer kept banging his head on the defense table, forcing sheriff's deputies to restrain him. Spencer was sentenced to 4 years to life for attempted murder on 4 people. As an 18-year-old on trial for child abuse on a cold day in January 2022. Alexis was captured by CCTV cameras driving to a dumpster and disposing of what looked like a black garbage bag. 3 hours later, garbage drivers went through the same dumpster looking for goods and got confused when they started hearing faint screams from a black garbage bag. At first, they thought it was a cat trapped inside, but one of them opened the bag, revealing something terrifying. One of the drivers found a newborn baby wrapped in a cold, wet towel, whimpering and freezing to death. While April, the driver, was attending to the baby, others were calling 911 and reported the incident to local authorities, with one of the witnesses saying the baby still had an umbilical cord. The police arrived at the scene and secured CCTV footage before rushing the baby to a hospital. Miraculously, the baby survived, and Alexis was identified from the footage and arrested immediately. When she was brought in for questioning, she confessed to the crime, claiming she put the baby in a trash bag and, not knowing what to do, added the baby among other trash. She drove around for a bit before dumping the baby out of confusion. She also tried to defend herself by saying it wasn't on purpose and that she acted out of panic. Alexis seemed to be under the impression that she didn't do anything wrong and made a bizarre statement, saying she wasn't aware of her pregnancy but knew she was pregnant. That statement led authorities to believe she was lying and had acted on purpose. She was charged with attempted first-degree murder and child abuse. Alexis testified that she doesn't recall giving birth to the baby and claimed to have been in shock, saying she didn't remember disposing of the baby. However, the prosecutors weren't convinced by Alexis's story and made her admit to her crimes in front of the jury. Alexis claimed she only knew about her pregnancy a day before she dumped the baby, while Stephen Asga, Alexis's ex-boyfriend, claimed they had both known about the baby since April.
My healthy, my loving and handsome baby boy, he is never going to forget the things you did. But for that I can say that my son will be somebody one day, no matter how much he has already been through.
The jury then reached a verdict that Alexis Avila was guilty of attempted first-degree murder and child abuse. Avila addressed the court and showed remorse, saying she was sad she'd missed every first milestone of the baby and had deprived him of motherly love. She was then sentenced to 16 years in prison. Which murderer do you think got a softer punishment than they deserved? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, then make sure to check out our next one shown on screen.